Wants to hire a real private dick anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics.
We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to you.
All right, folks, good morning and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here at AM 830 WCRN Radio Central. And of course, you can join the conversation over the next hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. And don't forget, our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388. 617-297-8388. And of course, this station does stream to the TuneIn app like thousands of other radio stations do. So you can join along, and it's so simple. If you don't have it, seconds to download it. Punch in WCRN. You're going to see our cool logo. Whoops, on this side over here. And do me a favor, hit the like button so we know you're there. We're easy to find, and that means you can take us anywhere. And of course, you can tell Alexa to play WCRN, and she'll do that, no questions asked. That's a pretty cool feature as well. Now, I do stream to my social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show. So you can do that on X and Facebook and Twitch TV, LinkedIn profile, Rumble, YouTube, and now Instagram, as well as the station's Facebook page. So multiple ways to watch and listen. And don't forget, this show is turned into a podcast when I get off the air. Not just that fantastic replay link on WCRNradio.com, but you can subscribe to this show on Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever, Google Play, Podbean, all the places you get your podcasts. So go ahead and subscribe. You won't miss an episode. Today is behind the glass flying the board back at HQ. So he'll get you set up and into the studio for two-way talking conversation. And that is at 508-871-7000. All right. So much to talk about today. And where do we begin, right? We have some Massachusetts stories that I'd like to get into, but we have some stuff going on at the Capitol as well. So I wanted to start with the update with the SAVE Act. And you know what's funny, right? And I already touched on this when the New Jersey governor comes out. And I hope if you saw her presser on this, you enjoyed it as much as I do, because she's going on to, at first, trying to talk to us and lecture us that Donald Trump is perpetuating these false narratives about voter fraud and he's just lying and there is no voter fraud. And she basically turns her page. So it's probably an intern thinking, oh my God, she didn't look at page 2. And then she has to talk to us about almost 7,000 New Jersey citizens who were illegal and were registered to vote. There's no fraud. Trump is so full of it. Boom. As one journalist said, the fact that the evidence shows, and this is a quote, and you gotta love the philosophy on some of these leftists, right? The fact that evidence shows this is taking place does not mean it's happening. Let that sink in. Continuing the quote, for the president to rely on the data in order to show that this is a reality is completely unacceptable. The evidence shows it's happening, but that doesn't mean it's happening. And the president's relying on the data, i.e. facts, to show that this is a reality. Well, that's completely unacceptable to do that. Now, that's an alleged journalist. And Molly Zhang Fast, right, from, was it MSN Now, I think she is. Trump is trying to use non-citizens voting in New Jersey, quote, to prove a point that doesn't exist. Seriously, what reality is this? Yeah, the classic, the point that doesn't exist. Right up until New Jersey's own Democratic governor admitted 6,600 non-citizens got registered. Even after they said they weren't citizens. Now, they're lowballing the number of people who actually voted, but this is like everything else in government. I don't believe when they lowball it at all. I always look for the small line, you know, in page 10 later about, well, it wasn't just 400 or 500 voted, it was, 2,000. I'm sure that will come out at some point. But sure, Molly, the real conspiracy is noticing this glitch. And the other thing is the New Jersey governor was trying to throw this on the vendor. The vendor shot back and said, we just give you the data and the information, and we clearly informed you guys that these people are not citizens, that they're illegals, that, check the right box, but you have their data. You guys decided to let it go through. So interesting stuff. So Washington has taken two enormous popular ideas, right? Requiring identification before someone casts a federal ballot. And that's huge. That's not even an 80-20. That's more like a 90 plus, 10 minus type thing. Basically, anybody with a functioning IQ and common sense thinks when you go to vote, you should establish that you are in fact who you are, especially for those of us that have showed up to vote. And we're told, well, you can't vote twice. You already did. What do you mean? No, I didn't. Yeah, you voted via mail-in ballot. Worst is if you get there and say, well, you checked in at 8 this morning. That's horrible. But they took these two very popular ideas, right? Requiring identification before you cast your federal ballot. And the second is stopping members of Congress from trading individual stocks. And they combine them into one bill. And the stock thing, it's just getting out of hand, right? There are a lot of apps. You can go to X and follow a lot of these guys who have created mirroring type of accounts. And they've set it up so whatever Paul Pelosi does, their account does, or they constantly monitor it and then update it on X, so you can pretty much do the same thing. So the House passed it, right? Now the Senate must decide whether to vote on the substance or improve the legislation in their estimation, or allow it to die behind the 60 vote threshold. Now, the immediate political backdrop, it's extraordinary if you think about it, right? New Jersey admitted that it is its motor voter registration system transmitted about 6,600 voter registrations for people who had expressly indicated they were not U.S. citizens. And then several hundred of those we know subsequently voted. Well, American elections should not be reserved exclusively for American citizens, apparently. And the public officials should not be permitted to profit from investments affected by the law, appropriations, regulatory decisions they control. So the House bill is a meaningful step, but it does not go far enough on either issue, I think. And the blatant insider trading that has gone on by members of Congress, as well as whether it's cabinet secretaries or agency directors or members of these agencies, that their decisions, which in essence will have the effect of law, right? Regulations, talk to the IRS about that, are going to make decisions. And they know that when they make this decisions or enforce a particular rule or regulation, how that's going to impact that industry. That's a lot of power. In anywhere other than in government, that would be insider trading. They went after living Martha Stewart, right? But I think, didn't she go to prison for lying during the investigation and not so much the insider trading? But I don't remember those details. If you do, feel free to text us 617-297-8388 or call 508-871-7000. I think that's what she actually went to prison for. So it's important here. See, the House did not attach the complete Save America Act's documentary proof of citizenship requirement to the stock trading bill. So the House took H.R. 7008, Stop Insider Trading Act, with H.R. 9368, the Voter ID Act, leaving out the proof of citizenship portion of that, which you would think they would go hand in hand, wouldn't you? When you go to register to vote, you establish a couple things. You should have identification to register to vote with your street address that's current with the registry, and then a couple other things, right? utility bills in your name or some other official, maybe bank statements or whatever they do, however they use it. So election provision requires identification when casting the ballot in a federal election. It does not by itself require the voter registration applicant to produce documentation, a proof of citizenship. That should be done when you register, in my opinion, right? And this distinction matters. Photo identification confirms who you are. Documentary proof of citizenship confirms whether you're eligible to even vote. Now, they are related safeguards, but they're not identical safeguards. In the official House Rules Committee, in that fine print there, it identifies packages HR 70008 incorporating the modified text of the 9368 House resolution, okay? So what's going to happen in the House? Now, the House passed HR 7008 on the 22nd by a 232 to 198. And that broke down. 218 Republicans voted yes. 13 Democrats crossed the aisle. That's weird and sad that you have to point out they crossed the aisle for something that is over 90% in favor by the American people. One independent voted yes, but 198 Democrats voted no. And there was one member who just didn't vote. I don't know why they were allowed to do that. So the official House clerk recorded the votes as roll call 280. Now, the Democrats who crossed the aisle and voted yes on this, I'm going to give you their names in the states, because these, you're going to find a common thread probably running through this is they're in tough districts. They have to answer to constituents if they're in these tough districts or swing states, etc. Catherine Castor in Florida, she decided to go yes on this. Henry Celia of Texas, Don Davis of North Carolina, Jared Golden of Maine, Vincent Gonzalez, he's in Texas, Josh Gothamer, New Jersey, Marcy Kuptor of Ohio, Susie Lee of Nevada, Jared Markowitz in Florida, and Chris Pappas, he's in New Hampshire, as most of us know, Marie Perez of Washington, Darren Soto of Florida, Derek Tran of California. Now, Derek Tran, I see him in these committees all the time. And my impression is he has a barely functioning IQ for that guy. Several are Democrats here representing these very competitive districts, right? Which suggests that the voter identification and congressional stock restrictions, they remain difficult issues for these vulnerable Democrats to oppose. And when you look at Massachusetts, guys, the House delegation voted against the package. Jake Auchincloss, Catherine Clark, Bill Keating, Stephen Lynch, Jim McGarvin, Seth Moulton, Richard Neal, Ayanna Pressley, and Lori Trahan. And I think Ayanna Pressley, you haven't got into it yet on this show. In case you haven't followed it, just as a side note, check into what's going on with their felon boyfriend and the $2 billion Western Mass courthouse contract. Corruption. So I guess the question that I posed to you guys today, Massachusetts voters should ask every member of a delegation a simple question. Were you voting against voter identification? Were you voting against congressional stock restrictions? Against the measures or the way they were combined, or just against all of it? Bundling the provisions, it does give lawmakers some political cover. A member can claim to support the proposal while opposing the complete package because of the other. Which is why, I think everything should have to be, I know that's not the system, guys, I get it. But wouldn't it be nice that if everything that we elected these people to go represent our interests, whether it's in DC or Beacon Hill, had a vote on everything on a straight up and down, on just that. Because it does work both ways. It gives members of our elected body cover, and then it also does put them sometimes in a situation where they like maybe the part of the bill that's the named part of the bill. Remember back in the days, we used to just identify everything as the number, right? The bill number. And then we started naming everything, which I think it was purposely done for the propaganda and the spin on it. But we have people, members of Congress, Senate, that can't bring themselves to vote, even though, it's a great meaty part of that bill. But there's something in there they just cannot do. And when they name it, Happiness for Veterans Bill, but they vote against it because it also had these riders, right? And these addendums that were just pork or outlandish or ridiculous things. So they can't bring themselves to vote yes for it. So their opponents then, well, you voted against the Happiness for Veterans Bill. And it puts them in a tough position. And wouldn't it be nice if everything was voted on as a straight yes or no, each item, not these addendums and riders and combining all these bills? But that's not the way it works. The Senate could eliminate that excuse by holding separate votes, by the way. So what does the voter ID section actually do? It has to do with the in-person voting, right? A person voting in person in a federal election would generally be required to present approved physical photo identification. And we all know pretty much what that means, right? Your state driver's license or state-issued motor vehicle identification card. Here in Mass, if you don't have a driver's license, you go through the same process at the registry and they'll issue you a photo ID, which is equal to a driver's license for ID purposes. Of course, it doesn't let you drive, but it'll let you cash checks and drink in a bar or buy liquor in a liquor store. Whatever you'd use your license for, it can be used there. Of course, we can always use our passports. In certain Department of Defense and Department of Veteran Affairs identifications, they can be accepted, or qualifying tribal identification. So if you're Native American and you have your tribal identification, that could serve as well. So the legislation contains provisional ballot and cure procedures for voters who arrive without acceptable identification. What does that mean? It means you get the ballot, you get the vote, but they set it aside and somehow will apply it later upon confirming that's who you are. But a lot of the mistakes, meaning a lot of the fraud, takes place in the mail and absentee voting, right? A mail voter would generally have several options. You include a copy of an acceptable photo identification when you send it back. You provide the last 4 digits of a social security number that attests the identification could not be obtained after reasonable effort. Last 4 of your social security number, it's easier to get from people than you might think. But if you can't produce this photo identification, they'll ask for that. And most people don't know. I mean, that's a lot of effort, probably more effort than people are going to go for that. Or they can use a notarized procedure attesting that the voter personally completed the ballot. That's a lot of effort too, but you could send back a notarized attestment that the person, that the name is on the ballot, that lives at that address, actually completed this, which then puts the onus onto, of course, the notary public. Now, the legislation also contains some exceptions connected to military, overseas and certain disability-related voting protections. It directs state and local public buildings to provide access to copying or scanning equipment for identification documents. It's nice that they put this in this, but most state buildings, federal buildings, public buildings all have ADA compliance anyway. But okay, they added it. Fine, that's good. I have no problem with that. So what are the opponents objected to here? Opponents argue that the accepted ID list is unnecessarily narrow. All right, so this is where it starts to get good. Nothing that I said that they accept is difficult for people to have. And I know, and I think they seem to be backing off. What say you on that? But the left would always say, without even hearing how racist they were sounding, that certain people can't get IDs. They don't have them. And they were talking about urban areas, and they were talking about minorities, as if minorities can't function like everyone else in society, and they don't know how to get an ID, and they walk around without IDs. I found it has nothing to do with race or anything. I found that most younger people leave the house with without wallets all the time. I never understood that. I couldn't wait to get a wallet like Dad when I was a little kid, and a watch, right? Like Dad has a watch. You never see him left the house without a watch and a wallet. And as a little boy, you want to get a watch like Dad, and you want to get a wallet. But as you get older, you realize you got to have your wallet on you when you're driving. You need that license on you. But I come across people in their 20s all the time and left the house without a penny on them or a wallet. And I always wonder, how do you function? I don't know. Not that I need it every single time I leave the house, but the fact that I know I have a wallet on that has ID, credit cards, and cash, I just feel okay. What about you? When you leave when I leave the house, I check phone, key, wallet, right? You got the keys. You're not going to get anywhere, right? I mean, without the keys, you get to your car and it won't unlock. But always feel those before I lock the door behind me. Phone, keys, wallet, all the time. And so many of these younger guys, they walk around without anything on them, and I don't know how they function during the day. What if you want to get a coffee? You don't have a penny on you. But anyway, what they object to is that this ID list is unnecessarily narrow. Okay. What would you like to include? They note that the student identification or an employee identification and some other government issued documents may not qualify. Nor should they, in my opinion. You have plenty between a state issued ID, a driver's license, a passport, tribal ID, and that's plenty of things. And basically everybody who's just functioning in society has one of those things, do they not? They also object to attaching election legislation to an ethics bill that otherwise could have drawn broader bipartisan support. I'm not sure in that assessment. Those details deserve a little examination, right? But they are arguments about implementation, not arguments against verifying a voter's identity. See the difference there. You want to sidetrack us and distract us with the implementation, not the argument on the actual voter ID. And a responsible compromise could broaden the acceptable documents while still requiring a secure, verifiable form of identification. Right? And the congressional stock provision, what does that do? Well, that legislation, it covers members of the House, senators, as well as their spouses, Papa P, and their dependent children. Also, Nancy Pelosi's son, he's gotten a little hot water for some of his business practices, shall we say. It generally prohibits those covered individuals from making new purchases of individual publicly traded securities in closely related financial products. Now, I hear what you're thinking. What about existing investments? The bill does not require members to immediately divest all individual stock holdings. So the covered individuals, the members of Congress, as well as the spouses and dependent children, they could sell them but would generally have to publicly disclose the planned sale between 7 and 14 days in advance. And maybe that was determined that the information that you might get in a subcommittee hearing, a closed door meeting, is going to be made public within that time frame. I'm assuming that, or I hope that was part of the debate. So what are the penalties for this? Well, violation of one of these trade rules, that could be a charge equal to the greater of either $2,000 or 10% of the transaction's value. It could result in forfeiture of the net gain. So why bother? A requirement to sell an improperly purchased investment. Now, the bill prohibits paying the penalty with official office or campaign funds. That's important because we, the taxpayers, we pay a lot of settlements in Congress, especially the sexual harassment settlements. And someone should be taking a blowtorch to that. But the bill prohibits paying those penalties with official office, meaning taxpayer funds, or campaign funds, the donors, and it would take effect 180 days after the enactment. There are some exceptions, right? The legislation excludes certain diversified or broadly held investment funds, government-focused funds, qualifying small business interests, and properly established blind trusts, because they don't have control over the day-to-day anyway. It also includes limited occupational and dividend investment exceptions. So there are some exceptions so you can still function and do your investments and so forth. Why the stock provision is not a complete ban? For those reasons. Call it a comprehensive stock trading ban oversells this legislation, quite frankly. It prohibits most new purchases, but members can retain and eventually sell existing individual stocks. It also does not apply the same restrictions to the president or the vice president. So Congress should not regulate a company on Tuesday, receive a classified briefing affecting the company on Wednesday, and trade the company stock on Thursday. That's just totally unacceptable, folks. We got to take our mid-show break here in the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show at AM 830 WCRN 508-871-7000. Lines open and available. 508-871-7000. Text 617-297-8388. Back in a moment, folks.
WCRN. Time now for the forecast from the Boston Independence Group Weather Center. Call Jerry Doherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spear, and here's the latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. We've got sunshine, low humidity, light winds. I mean, today is really that A+ forecast that you hope for all year long. And the good news is that we're going to do this over and over again with a similar forecast each day through the weekend. Mornings are going to be a little on the cool side as you wake up to 50s and 60s each day. I'm Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spear, and you can hear Boston 25 live for the morning drive weekdays on AM 830 WCRN.
More live and local radio is next. Stay tuned to Radio Central 830 WCRN.
Perner Logging and Land Clearing. Fully equipped with state-of-the-art equipment to handle all of your lot and land clearing needs, whether it's 1 acre or 100. They regularly service customers in the local area and will travel to neighboring communities and beyond to get the job done. Now, whether you're doing new construction, renovations, or clearing land for a new development, the Perner Logging and Land Clearing team of experienced personnel makes small or large jobs run efficiently, giving them the ability to always keep the competitive edge. They'll quote your job from something small to hundreds of acres, factoring in all aspects, including the wood salvage value, if any. In addition, they have the right equipment for each size job, making for the most efficient job site possible. For every job, Perner Logging and Land Clearing make sure the client's goals are the main objective. Call Perner Logging and Land Clearing today for a free estimate, 978-270-9916. That's 978-270-9916.
I'm Lee Gaudette from Gaudette Insurance and the Gaudette Insurance Show. You're listening to Radio Central, AM 830 WCRN.
All right, folks. Welcome back here. Second half of the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's easy, right? 508-871-7000. Same number we've had for literally decades at this point, at least, I think, two. And of course, text line 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388, reminding folks that you can tell Alexa to play WCRN, and she's going to do that, no questions asked. And I'm streaming on multiple platforms, including Twitch TV, Instagram, LinkedIn profile, X, Facebook, and of course, Rumble. And the show is turned into a podcast within a few minutes of getting off the air or so. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, etc. Many ways to subscribe. And I noticed that's actually been downloads have been increasing. So thank you guys for that. So basically, I want to move to Minnesota and an update on what's happening out there, because you've got the convicted Feeding Our Future ringleader, Amy Bach, remember this, alleges that Tim Walz and the AG out there, Keith Ellison, and Rep. Ilhan Omar, that they knew far more about the fraud environment than they're acknowledging. Of course, my response to that is duh. But her accusations have not yet been proven in court, which, as we know, is what really matters in this case. And Nick Shirley, by the way, he's focused in now. This is great, right? Because it's like layers of the fraud that he's unpeeling, and good for this kid. You know, he started with the fraudulent daycare centers, and he went to the hospice, and then he went to the restaurants, right? Because that was the other aspect. People were setting up bogus restaurants, shell of an office space, not a functioning stove or refrigerator in the thing. And on paper, they were providing the meals to the hospices and even to the daycare centers. Now the next level that he's gone on to, this is just a side thing from what I'm going to get into, but I think it's fascinating, is he found the equipment rental companies. Same thing. For example, one of the ones he's tracked down was a vendor who had a federal contract to provide, knee braces and wheelchairs and crutches and canes and equipment to the hospice and to other federally reimbursed businesses. And one of the ones he tracks down, $12 million in equipment rental out of the guy's apartment, not one piece of medical equipment there, of course. So good for Nick on that. But let's recap this Feeding Our Future scandal. It was one of the first ones that broke, right? Feeding Our Future was a Minnesota nonprofit. They acted as a sponsor for organizations participating in the federally funded child nutrition programs. And remember when this went, but I think this one got buried from constant packing on of other fraud. And during the COVID emergency, right, normal meal services rules, they were relaxed. And when you relax regulations, it's usually playtime for fraudsters, isn't it? So they were relaxed so that children could continue receiving food while schools and other institutions were closed. And a good fraud like this is usually based in something like this. A good idea, and a sympathetic idea, and something that all of us, or at least 99.9999% of us say, yeah, because when COVID closed these schools and things messed up, we talked about it here on this show, guys. Well, wait a minute. School lunches and some breakfasts in some schools were the only time that some of these kids got a meal because of the home life situation. And the other part of that was kids who were either in a neglected home situation or an abusive home situation could go unnoticed because the required reporters, i.e. teachers, social workers, principals, etc., had no access to the children and couldn't see bruises or a child coming to school unwashed in dirty clothes without lunches, breakfast, or money to buy one. And they could see the neglect there. So, of course, when this all happened, to set up a program to continue receiving food while schools and other institutions were closed, we were all said, heck yeah on that. Of course, these kids need a meal. It's got to come from somewhere. So we were all, okay, let's do this. So Feeding Our Future grew from handling only a few $1 million annually before the pandemic to all of a sudden overseeing hundreds of millions of dollars in reimbursements. Think about that. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Couldn't you feed all of Minnesota at that point? And that sends no red flags up to anybody? So federal prosecutors proved that Feeding Our Future and participating meal sites submitted fraudulent attendance records, fabricated invoices, widely inflated their claims for meals that were never served. The stolen money funded luxury vehicles and property, travel, of course, personal enrichment, rather than those meals for the children. And legitimate restaurants got in on this. So you had complete fabricated, say, commercial kitchens. Then you had legitimate restaurants that were restaurants operating. But they must have had a friend of a friend who said, hey, fill out some paperwork here and you can bill for 20, 30, or 200 meals a day that they never produced. They never bought the raw ingredients for, which can always be what trips you up. The IRS, believe it or not, is very good at calculating what your business expenses should be. And I've seen situations where pizza places ended up in IRS trouble because what they claimed to be getting in cash, obviously this would have been a money laundering organization. They would say they were having an extra $2,000, $3,000 in sales a night. But guess what? The books didn't show them buying the 14-cent pizza box that you would need to produce that many pizzas. So when you're going to play with the books, understand the IRS has an algorithm for everything. So all of a sudden, it jumps up to hundreds of millions of dollars, and that money's being funded for personal stuff. So this Amy Bach, the founder and executive director of Feeding Our Future, she was convicted of conspiracy, wire fraud, bribery in May of this year. And she was sentenced to 500 months. It's 41 years and 8 months in federal prison for that role, her role in this. And the central political issue is not whether Bach committed fraud. That was unquestioned at all. The federal jury settled the question. How could a scheme of this size continue when state officials had warning signs, not even warning signs, they had whistleblowers. Put a pin in that for a second. Suspected fraud, legal authority, regulatory responsibility, and access to senior political leaders. So the crime's not in dispute. She did it. Red-handed all the way through. Convicted of it, 41 years and 8 months. And then the question, and we all asked it, right? Well, who knew what? Then the story started coming about the whistleblowers who brought things to their bosses or even to the governor, Walz, attention, and they were more often punished than taking them seriously. And then, of course, remember the tapes that came out with Ellison about he'll take care of it for donors, donations to his campaign. So Minnesota's nonpartisan Office of Legislative Auditor concluded that the Minnesota Department of Education's inadequate oversight created opportunities for fraud. Isn't that the thing behind everything that we talk about when we talk about voter ID, right? say Voter Act, etc. It's creating the atmosphere and ability for fraud to be committed. And as we see with Doge and other things, and Scott Bassett, he's doing a fantastic job, right? I mean, he's pulled back money from people who have been dead for years and all this kind of stuff that Doge helped kick everything off. You got to get it before it happens. It's so much harder to peel the money back. It's so much harder to fix things once it happens. So there are ways to make the environment for fraud more difficult without interfering with the actual original objective. What do I mean? What the heck are you talking about? Meaning we can put these voter safeguards in without making it difficult or impossible or at all for you to actually vote if you're legit. So the auditor found that the department failed to act on warning signs that existed before the pandemic. So even before COVID hit and we were in that situation, there were red flags, there were warning signs, and they took no action. They failed to hold Feeding Our Future accountable to program requirements. So even the requirements that are in place, guys, didn't hold them to it. And anybody in embezzlement, let's take embezzlement for a second. And I've investigated embezzlements and company stealing and shrinkage in restaurants, retail stores over the years. And when you have an embezzlement situation, it's usually the first time, maybe even the first couple times, that somebody borrows from corporate money, or the cases we've talked about with dead campaign, accounts. They're in a pickle. They're in a situation, and they just need a few $1,000s till the end of the month just to cover the mortgage or whatever they've got. And when they do it, often when they first do it, they absolutely intend to replace that money by the end of the month or the 15th or whatever their plan is in their head when they do it. And what happens is, of course, they didn't have the money in the first place, so they can't replace the money. And they get a little panic attack and they have a little anxiety. But guess what? The world didn't fall down. The sky didn't fall down. The world didn't collapse. Their world didn't blow up. Nobody asked any questions. Sheriff didn't knock at the door. The DA didn't call. Nothing happened because nobody knows it yet. And they think, well, there really were no consequences to that. And that's why it becomes easier to borrow again. And then there's a point where you stop borrowing with the intention of making it right so nobody knows, and you just decide, this is cool. You get greedy, and you start taking on a regular basis. And maybe it gets bigger and bigger, or it just gets consistent. But when you create that atmosphere, man, and there's no consequences, and people see that, you have created a feeding frenzy here on the fraud. And the department was ill prepared to respond as the organization expanded. So COVID hits, we've got these programs now being leaned on, and now they got to fulfill things that they weren't fulfilling before. And maybe the program's expanding from lunches, school lunches for kids in school, to breakfast and lunches. And when they add these on, and because of the panic and the heat of COVID days and pandemic days, all these regulations are relaxed and nobody's checking anything. Remember, and I know I brought it up on the show because I found it interesting. Elon once talked about how these COVID funds that were set for the schools that were supposed to redo the ventilation systems, filter systems, and all that. And they just put out billions of dollars. In these schools, teachers, administrators, they could draw down on this account. And they were drawing down. But they were drawing down and they were listing things like holding a conference or a meeting at a casino in Nevada, or just listing a bunch of things, which later we found they were using for what? Personal parties, travel, trips. And all that Doge did is they said, going forward, to draw down out of this account, which was steadily decreasing its amount, upload documentation, upload a receipt, just upload something for us. And Elon said, no one was checking. We didn't care what they uploaded. We just wanted to see if they'd start uploading it. He said they could have literally uploaded a picture of their cat and the system would have let it go through. What they wanted to see, what happens if you required or just simply said, you got to give us some documentation. All of a sudden, that drawdown pretty much came to a halt once they needed to upload something. And of course, you assume when you're asked to upload the documentation for this event or the receipt for what you're saying this is for, that it's frozen until somebody looks at it and then signs off on it. Fair assumption, or I'd assume that too. He said just the act of asking them to upload something stopped the drawdown. That's how casual and blatant the stealing was on that. So the auditor in Minnesota, legislative auditor, supposed to be a nonpartisan office, said they also failed to use its authority effectively, meaning they had all this power to investigate and ask the questions, and they just didn't do it. And they allowed weaknesses in supervision to continue as public payments rapidly increased. And it rapidly increased. Sure, some of it had to do with legitimate feeding children, breakfast and lunch at home. But a lot of it had to do with, wow, the fraudsters said they're just rubber stamping everything. Put it through. What's the worst they can do? Say no, reject it. You're no better off. It didn't cost you anything. You're not really doing it anyway. And that's important why I say that and how I say that, because at that time, all of these people, given that it's Minnesota, you got Tim Walz, Ellison, and Ilhan Omar, who clearly had indications of this going on. They did not, earnestly did not think that there were going to be any consequences for committing this fraud. And they had no reason to think there would be. They believed, appropriately rather, that no one's going to investigate this. And if somebody brings it up, it's not going anywhere, especially since a portion of this is going into congressional and gubernatorial and attorney general campaign funds. And that money's got to come from somewhere. And that's not a partisan campaign allegation. It is the conclusion of the Minnesota's own legislative watchdog who says all this. So the audit did not establish that Tim Walz personally ordered payments to fraudsters or personally profited from the scheme so far, but the Department of Education was part of his executive branch, and the breakdown occurred under his administration. So Walz may not have signed every reimbursement check, but governors do not get to take credit for every successful program and then claim complete detachment when one of their agencies loses hundreds of millions of dollars. Political accountability does not require proof that the governor personally joined the conspiracy. It requires asking whether his administration responded competently after the warning began, when all the bells and whistles were going off and they began flashing. How did they respond? And to remind you, folks, you're listening to the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830, WCRN, 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. So Amy Block alleges, now she's saying, hey, Walz and Ellison, they knew far more than they're pretending. In January, in a jailhouse interview, Bach alleged that state officials continued approving and paying these claims, right, for the meals, the feeding, after she raised concerns about suspicious participating organizations. So she's sending up saying, this isn't right. This is a lot of food, a lot of payment, and I don't see this happening. But listen carefully to her precise words. She said, and I'm quoting now, I have to believe that the governor's office and Keith Ellison's office were aware of this. And I think that's a fair statement. How could they not be? When you got her, who's doing over 4 years now, almost 5 years, and other whistleblowers who didn't just talk about it at cocktail parties, they actually officially blew the whistle and submitted the appropriate forms and statements to the fact. She also said that if they were not aware, that failure would in itself be very concerning. No kidding. That is a serious accusation, but it is not the same as Bach producing direct evidence that Walter Ellison personally approved fraudulent transactions, but they certainly allowed it to happen. She said, I have to believe it's inference. And I agree with that. And governors in most states, I know in Massachusetts, our governors typically are actually working and they're seeing the bills and you know, unless you happen to be a governor that seems to be on vacation all the time, like the current one in Massachusetts. But they have people who briefed them on this stuff. So again, it's not firsthand testimony that she personally informed Walz or that Walz acknowledged the information or that he ordered anyone to continue paying. But Bach's allegations justify subpoenas, testimony, and document production. Maybe not criminal complicity at this point as an established fact, but it needs to be looked at, does it not? The strongest case against Walz is one of executive failure and political accountability. He's paying the price to some degree, right? I think he didn't run for governor again because he saw this was happening. He saw this, and he knew the degree of political liability this was. And his Department of Education had suspicions about the Feeding Our Future by 2020. The department confronted the organization, became involved in the litigation, contacted the FBI in 21, and attempted at different points to restrict payments and applications. Nevertheless, the fraud continued until the federal search warrants were executed in January of 2022. And the governor's defense is that state officials reported their suspicions to federal law enforcement and had to avoid compromising the FBI's investigation. So there is truth in that defense, I guess, right? The FBI publicly acknowledged the state's cooperation, and the Attorney General's office says disclosure of the investigation could have been alerted, or could have alerted, rather, suspects. But that does not erase the auditor's conclusion. It doesn't negate it. The Minnesota failed to act effectively on early warning signs. That's the bottom line on that. So what has to be answered? When Walz personally informed, when was he informed Feeding Our Future was suspected of fraud? When did that happen? How did that happen? What written briefings did this office receive? And then who said, hey, let the payments keep going? Who decided the payments had to continue? And did anyone in his office pressure the Department of Education to approve additional sites? And I'm curious as to what was that process. Do you literally go online and fill a form on it and there's no site inspection? There's a whole host of jobs that are just simply site inspectors. Some are for insurance companies, some are for the state or agencies. I get them in my agency, requests to go verify a house is actually there for like a refi or something, or insurance company to ask you to go evaluate a property, condition of the roof, are the gutters up, that kind of thing. So did they do anything like that? Was there any process of verifying that a brand new company comes on the scene and they're going to do 200-300 meals a day at whatever it is, $6, $7, I don't know what it is, but it's a lot of money, 5 days a week, it adds up. And nobody's checking these new additional sites? Were fraud investigators told that aggressive scrutiny would be portrayed as racial discrimination? Because that's what we've heard on this. And why were stronger emergency controls not implemented? So we'll relax everything. We'll allow hundreds of new sites to come on, but we'll have no stronger controls for it. Matter of fact, we're relaxing everything. So why did his administration's existing safeguards fail across multiple service programs? And did political considerations affect enforcement decisions? Were any officials ever disciplined in this? Did anybody lose pay or get suspended even with pay? And why should taxpayers believe the same bureaucracy can now police itself? There may not presently be proof that Walz participated in fraud. Maybe there's some, there's abundant evidence that fraud flourished under his administration, no question about it. And those are different accusations. But the second is already sufficiently serious to get in on this. And Keith Ellison, also a lot of problems there. His office says it was actively involved in exposing Feeding Our Future. No paper trail to really support that, though. All right. But we're coming to the end of the Thursday edition. More points I can make on this, but I think we've sufficiently caught you up on the Feeding Our Frenzy Minnesota fraud going on. Thank you for joining me. Back next Wednesday morning. Don't forget to subscribe to the Joe Mangiacotti Show on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day and a fantastic weekend, folks. Joe out.